The G7 summit has wrapped up. What was accomplished? And where's the U.S.-China trade war headed? We'll discuss this and more with our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us via Skype from Los Angeles. Hi, Lisa. So busy weekend in France. Was anything significant accomplished, do you think? I mean, were there any advances in trade agreements, that sort of thing?
No, not really. But are there ever really any advances at these acronym type meetings and summits that are held annually? I think these are just feel good events. The media loves it because it kind of likes to pit characters against one another and say what will happen on the sidelines of the G7 summit, what will happen, between this country and this country who are in some sort of a row. This year, obviously, all eyes were on a handful of countries. Obviously, Donald Trump going over there, the Europeans cozying up to Iran. Iran wasn't going to come. The Europeans invited them to come. A little bit of a slick move by France. And of course, China. China is the question mark in terms of foreign policy, or one of, for Donald Trump, and whether or not the U.S. will get some sort of decent deal with the Chinese government over trade. Both sides are suffering. Both sides have placed tariffs on the other. Major economies here, but we're hoping for a softening of tones and a softening of rhetoric moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, you did hear that from the reporters saying there was definitely, a distance between Trump and the other six leaders. There was a tension there. Now, Donald Trump, kind of brushing it aside, saying, no, we're all getting along pretty good. Things turned out well. But I'm guessing there probably was some very real tension there. Would you agree there?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. Donald Trump really can't catch a break here, whether it's domestically or regarding foreign policy. But I know these weren't particularly his friends who were gathered. With regards to China, I think the tension is there. But I will say the silver lining is that the headlines coming out at the tail end of the G7 were that China's looking to have calm talks going forward, which is positive news. So even if there's negative news coming out of the G7, perhaps the media can focus on some sort of positive news going forward, that there may be some sort of negotiation or sit down with the Chinese that will be calmer, quieter, much more friendly going forward. Outside the G7, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. This is the two news stories from the weekend, but outside the G7, protesters, and of course, this is the kind of the anti-globalization movement. We're seeing this a lot all over, particularly in Europe, particularly in France. What do they even want? It's not clear, but people are in protest mode. Resistance, right? That's what we're hearing a lot of all over. So
Oh, for
more of
sure.
that.
Yeah, and of course, climate change always comes back in these kinds of meetings as well. Now, Donald Trump, I understand, sat out of most of these talks on climate change. Any thoughts on that? And again, I mean, I guess the rest of the leaders probably, they're in sync on their view on climate change, but Donald Trump being the exception here.
Yeah, the whole conversation around climate change, it's really unfortunate. And it's unfortunate because it's become so polarizing when it's something that's so it's scientific, either it is or it isn't, but it's not the big deal that the left makes it. And therefore, the right to counteract that needs to say it's not a big deal at all. So they basically stay out of the conversation or make light of the conversation. That's what we're seeing here. Donald Trump saying, well, there's so many bigger issues, especially on the world stage, that if we're gathering, what are we talking about here? Is there scientific proof for climate change? Not to the extent that these people are pushing it. I mean, there's so many comical memes all over over social media that talk about, is this an issue? Well, no, let's blame it on climate change. Or is this an issue? Let's blame it on climate change. And that's how silly this conversation about climate change has become. That it's become the left's go-to. Here in the United States, we've already had a couple rounds of the Democrat debate candidates for 2020. We've had a couple rounds of debates, and it always comes back to, well, we need to push climate change. We need to push climate change. Well, I'm sorry, if we can't keep our borders safe, and we can't keep terrorists out of our borders, and if we can't, protect our assets in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and Iran and in the Persian Gulf, I don't think you're going to have to worry about climate change much longer, because a nuclear bomb could land on our shores. So, it's a bit comical when you think about the extent to which this issue is pushed. And again, that counter voice that needs to minimize it in order to make the illustration of how silly it is to prioritize this issue.
Yeah, it needs some perspective, some context, doesn't it, for sure. Now, Brazil's president, Bolsonaro, he didn't seem to appreciate the gesture from the G7, speaking climate change, to, their help offered to fight the Amazon fires there. And again, somewhat overstated in the sense that they're using some dated pictures back from 2003, I think, at the wrong fire pictures up there, but a much better picture, I guess, and also, the statement that 20% of the world's oxygen comes from the Amazon forest, which again is overstated. Not that it's not important, certainly it is. But so Bolsonaro was saying, hey, we're not, a colony here, right? We're saying, yeah, we got some of this, we've got some technology here, we've got some know-how here as well. We're not as dependent on, the G7 as they may think. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Bolsonaro is in a very, very delicate situation, because on the one hand, as you clearly pointed out, his frustration is that he's not a charity case. He's doing well. He's able to, and that's why you see some of the headlines that are also exaggerated, where he says, we need no help at all. We don't want anyone coming in here, which again, exaggerated. But on the other hand, Bolsonaro does not want an example made of him and his country. He's new in office. It's that whole new sheriff in town is a great way to put it. He's changing the way that people view Brazil, particularly in the landscape of Democrat socialist countries like Venezuela, or countries that support that kind of mentality in Latin America. He wants to make Brazil a very strong economy, a very strong country. And in his eyes, the way that the Amazon fire is being perceived and treated is going to weaken that image. And I think that that's what he's referring back to. But
yeah, I'm no expert on Brazil, but I do understand that some of the farmers in that area, it's not uncommon for them to actually be lighting fires this time of the year to clear the forest area to grow more crops, right? So so there's a number of things going on here, right? So is it climate change? Well, I hardly think it's climate change if somebody's setting the fire deliberately.
Right. As you said clearly, there's use. He doesn't want this to be the agenda of any one talking point. These fires are happening. We have fires here in California, so I can understand how they could be very devastating in certain aspects. This is more of a natural body, so it's considered something that's very sad. But what's interesting, Paul, is that you see so many of these kind of Monday morning quarterback, like humanitarian types, jumping on the story and posting it on Instagram and posting it on Facebook, and all of a sudden everyone's concerned about the Amazon. Meanwhile, I don't know how many people can really point it out on a map of those people posting about it. But I think, like you said, this is a very nuanced issue. This is it surpasses that conversation about climate change. It's political, it's natural, it has a lot to do with agricultural and economical decisions as well, as you pointed out. So I think it's not right to look at it from this one single perspective, but to look at it much more broadly. And I think Brazil knows what they're doing.
Okay, yeah, we'll watch that with interest over the next few weeks. Now, the G7 summit, you had mentioned again the surprise visit from Iran's foreign affairs minister, Zarif. So he didn't just show up. I'm assuming he had some sort of an invitation. Now, I don't know if that's directly from France or if it's a combination of invites from the other six country leaders. Now, did Trump know about that in advance as well? I mean, obviously, there's that's kind of the conflict there, Iran and America, tied in with the whole nuclear development and so forth. And so what was that all about? Is that tied in with, hey, let's get a deal going here. We need your oil, Iran, and we'll make a way to do this?
This was a very interesting interaction because on the one hand, he was there. And on the other, Iran is still chest thumping and saying, we want to export more oil. We want to enrich more uranium, and we have no, plans to sit down and concede any of this with the United States. At the meantime, they're hoping that the Europeans bail them out and that the Europeans stick to, or at least sign into a deal similar to the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal, which what we called the P5+1, which the United States pulled out of in May of 2018. Now, why Zarif was there? Well, it appears that Macron of France and the Iranians have been meeting in order to come up with something of a deal, or to at least maintain the relationship, or at least the economic relationship between the two bodies. France is leading that. I think the UK got a little bit shaky with that whole tanker situation. And, it was funny because during those days of waiting to see, if tensions increase more between the UK and Iran, those were in that time period is when France met with Iran, which is very, very interesting to see a European nation go at it alone and to kind of step over another European nation. Now, remember, Brexit didn't happen. The UK is still part of the EU. They still are functioning as a body. They still have more leverage to negotiate as a body. But let's just say that the Europeans would love to maintain a deal with Iran, and Iran is looking for them, save their economy, move forward with them, and Iran is getting impatient. So what better than for Zarif to make this surprise visit to the G7 and say, here we are, and we're not going away.
Okay, yeah, no, this will be ongoing for some time. And matter of fact, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about Iran and Israel here too. That's all part of this as well. Let's just back up for a bit here too. We had touched on the China-U.S. trade war. Wanted to just to explore that a bit further there. Again, Trump saying that he regretted not raising tariffs even higher while he was at the G7 there. He had mentioned that. And at the same time, he also said he got a couple of encouraging phone calls from China. So a little hard to sort all of that out. And as you mentioned, there was a bit of a softening in tone from China there as well. But in the meantime, it does look like, just practically speaking, the tariffs just went up on both sides, didn't they?
Yeah, this was Friday, right before the markets closed, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow the stock market, Paul, but it was bloody on a Friday afternoon for that news to be announced that both sides are going, against each other and raising the tariffs. There's no relent, and it seems as though the U.S. feels that they have the leverage, they have the upper hand, and therefore they're able to raise the tariffs. But China, it looks like, is playing head to head, and they raise the tariffs just as much. So we're feeling it here in the United States, and many segments of the economy are directly affected. I know those who are involved in construction or in electronics or in import export are they're feeling the pinch quite a bit and quite drastically. The stock market as well, and we're headed towards the 2020 election here. So this is something that Donald Trump he must be very confident about going forward. But at the same time, the Chinese, they're not backing down. So
Yeah, hopefully something happens here because, yeah, like you say, an election coming up as well. Very interesting how this will all turn out, but it creates an uncertain economic environment for sure. Now, if we can briefly touch on Israel here as well. Now, they're saying they over the weekend here they stopped some Iranian Revolutionary Guard killer drone strikes, apparently. I think they were coming from Syria. And I think there were also a number of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip at Israel. And there were thousands of residents ended up rushing to bomb shelters. I think there was an outdoor concert going on, that sort of thing. And so lots of stuff going on there.
Lots of stuff, but I might add it's just a day in the life of an average Israeli.
Hmm.
This is what they go through, enemies to the north, to the south, to the west. And it's exactly what they deal with, and they know that these enemies exist. So you have the Gaza Strip on one side, you have Syria to the north, you have Lebanon to the south, and this is ongoing. So they foiled this drone attack coming from Syria. That would be launched directly by the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guard Corps, this elite paramilitary group that is obviously an arm of the Iranian military. And as we know, they're functioning as a paramilitary or a proxy within Syria right now, and they're quite active there. They're using that as a launch pad to threaten Israel, particularly when these tensions rise between the West and Iran. Israel is right there and is, kind of the token enemy that can be targeted. You also have Lebanon, where Hezbollah is housed, and you have threats there, and of course the Gaza Strip, where Hamas is operating. So you think about these three terror organizations surrounding Israel, a country the size of New Jersey, where children are playing. It's summertime; they have to get into these bomb shelters, etc. So a day
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
life.
yeah. Feel for the kids, frankly, on both sides of that border there. Wow. I mean, I'm thankful to be living here in Canada for sure. And now, thankfully, the Iron Dome defense system seemed to work too and intercepted a couple of those missiles. So I guess that's good news as well to hear. I'm running out of time here. Thanks so much, Lisa. Appreciate you making time for us again.
My pleasure.